I'll never forget the way she smiled that afternoon. It wasn't wide or loud, but a small, sharp curl at the corner of her mouth that told me she thought she had won. She held the papers in her hand like they were a trophy. My name was there, clear as day, but I knew I had never signed a thing. I didn't scream. I didn't snatch them from her or cause a scene. I just stared at that smile, calm, steady, memorizing it, because even then I understood something she didn't. Her arrogance was already my advantage. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, you cannot miss this story. Watch closely because every second builds toward a shocking truth. It was just after 2 o'clock. The sunlight cut through the blinds in narrow lines across the dining table. A half-empty coffee mug sat beside me, the steam long gone cold. Outside, kids shouted in the distance, their laughter so ordinary it felt cruel in contrast. I sat there with my world cracking beneath me while she leaned back in her chair, swirling her tea as if nothing about this was extraordinary. "You really should have seen it coming," she said. Her voice carried that false sweetness she used on everyone else, but I knew better. I'd spent a lifetime reading her tone shifts, the little pauses that gave her away. My heart raced, but my face stayed still. Years of swallowing words had taught me how to wear calmness like armor. I didn't argue. Instead, I let silence stretch long enough for her to think she had silenced me completely. What she never knew was that I had already tucked something away. A copy of a phone call she didn't realize I had recorded weeks earlier. Her voice, her words, clear as glass. I didn't need to win this moment. I only needed her to keep talking, to let the rope coil tighter around her own neck. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and stale bread. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, every second dragging me deeper into the reality that my wedding was gone. Cancelled. Not because of me, not because of my fiancé, but because of the lie she had crafted with those forged papers. I should have cried, I suppose. At 65, tears come easy. But I didn't. I felt something heavier, colder. Not despair, but a steady burn in my chest that felt like iron. She thought she had left me broken. She thought that smile meant she'd buried me. I remember the first unsettling clue that morning. The florist had called, asking if I wanted to cancel the final delivery. "We got a notice," she'd said, confused, "from someone claiming to be you." My stomach had dropped. I rushed over to the venue only to find the coordinator shaking her head, waving the same set of documents she now held in front of me. My signature, or something like it, was scrawled across the bottom. That's when I traced it back to her. Every line pointed in her direction. She had left fingerprints, sloppy ones, thinking no one would care enough to check. But I cared. She sipped her tea slowly, enjoying every second of my supposed downfall. "You're too trusting," she added with a laugh that barely touched her throat. "That's always been your weakness." I clenched my hands under the table, nails pressing into my palms until little crescents formed. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing them shake. Instead, I leaned forward slightly, close enough that she caught the calm steadiness in my eyes. "You think so?" I asked softly. My voice didn't rise, but something in the way I said it made her shift in her chair. For just a second that smile faltered. The air between us thickened. Outside, the sound of a passing truck rattled the window pane, pulling her attention just long enough for me to breathe. I studied her face, the slight twitch near her temple, the way her fingers tapped against the porcelain mug. These were her towels, and I filed them away like evidence. I stood then, slowly, deliberately. The chair scraped against the floor with a sound that made her blink. I walked to the counter, poured myself water, and let the silence hang heavy in the room. She expected me to beg, to shout, to break. Instead, I let calmness stretch until it became uncomfortable for her. When I sat back down, I placed the glass in front of me with care. "It's funny," I said as if making casual conversation, "how things have a way of circling back." She tilted her head, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled then, the faintest curve of my lips. It wasn't joy, not even triumph. It was patience. The kind of patience that unnerves people who thrive on control. I didn't answer her question. I didn't need to. Her phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with a message. I caught the name before she flipped it over too quickly. Another small slip. Another piece of the puzzle. She noticed me notice, and her smile froze just a little tighter. I let my eyes linger on her face. "You've always underestimated me," I said softly. For a moment the clock ticked louder than both our breaths. She wanted to dismiss me, to laugh it off, but she couldn't quite find the words. My pulse steadied. My breathing slowed. For the first time that day I realized something important. I wasn't the one on trial here. She was. And though she thought the papers in her hand sealed my fate, I already had the first key to undoing her work. She set her mug down harder than necessary, the clink echoing across the table. "Don't look at me like that," she snapped. I didn't flinch. I leaned back, folded my hands in my lap, and simply said, "Like what?" Her silence told me everything. He knew. Somewhere deep down she knew I wasn't broken. She knew I was watching, recording, collecting. And as the afternoon light shifted, casting longer shadows across the walls, I made a quiet promise to myself. She would regret that smile. Her silence told me everything. She knew I wasn't broken. She knew I was watching, recording, collecting. And in that instant, as the afternoon light shifted into shadows across the wall, I understood something even more clearly. If she was bold enough to forge my name once, she had done it before. Maybe not with me, but with others. That meant there would be traces. The first trail began in the smallest of places. Later that evening, after she left my house with that same smug tilt of her chin, I sat at my kitchen table with nothing but my notebook, a pen, and a glass of water. The house was quiet, almost too quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I started writing down every odd detail I had brushed aside over the past months. The unexplained phone calls she always ended when I walked into the room, the envelopes she hid beneath a pile of magazines, the mysterious way she always seemed to know things about my schedule before I told her. At 65, I never imagined I'd become a detective of my own life, but that's what she had turned me into. My hands shook a little as I scribbled, not from fear, but from the strange energy coursing through me. Betrayal had given me a focus I hadn't felt in years. The next morning I checked the stack of mail still sitting on the counter. That's when I noticed an envelope addressed to her but delivered to my address by mistake. I nearly tossed it aside before curiosity tugged at me. The return address was a clinic 2 towns over. My stomach knotted. I slid it open carefully, the paper crisp against my fingers, and scanned the lines. It wasn't mine, but there it was again. My name. Listed as a contact. I pressed my hand against the table to steady myself. She was sloppy. Careless. An arrogance like hers always left evidence. That same week I went to the library, not for books but for the old computer room most people had forgotten. I didn't want her to suspect a thing if she ever glanced at my browser history at home. Sitting in that dimly lit room with the faint smell of dust and paper, I learned how to trace numbers, how to check property records, how to piece together fragments of information that, alone, seemed harmless but together told a story. Her story. Each night I'd come home with a few new notes tucked safely into my purse. I wrote everything down in neat, dated entries. The call log I overheard, the receipts she tossed without thinking, the names she mentioned too casually. Patterns started to appear. She wasn't just targeting me, she had used other people before, smaller cons, subtle manipulations. I could see it now. The way she tested boundaries, the way she thrived on watching people stumble. One afternoon I stopped by the small coffee shop on Main Street, the one with the creaky chairs and the smell of cinnamon. I chose a corner table, ordered tea, and waited. Not for her, but for someone I remembered she had once tangled with. A woman named Carol, a former coworker of hers. Carol arrived, skeptical at first, clutching her purse tightly. But when I mentioned her name, the tension in her face shifted to recognition. "She did it to you too, didn't she?" Carol whispered, leaning across the table. I nodded. We spoke for nearly an hour, sharing details, fitting pieces together like a jigsaw puzzle neither of us wanted but both of us needed to complete. Carol told me about a loan document with her forged signature, about how she had almost lost her job when discrepancies came to light. As she spoke, I felt anger boil, but beneath it was something sharper. Validation. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't crazy. This was who she was. I thanked Carol, promised her discretion, and left with a heavier but clearer heart. On the walk home, the cool air brushed against my cheeks and I realized I no longer felt helpless. Every new detail was a weapon. That night I sat at my dining table again, notebook open, pen in hand. My handwriting, though slower than it once was, stayed steady. I wrote down Carol's story in full, leaving nothing out. Then I flipped back through my earlier entries, cross-referencing dates, times, and names. The connections glowed like threads on a web. But I didn't just collect stories. I collected proof. Screenshots of messages, photographs of documents, recordings stored safely where she couldn't reach them. I may have been older, but I wasn't naive about technology. In fact, being underestimated worked in my favor. Nobody expects a 65-year-old woman to know how to encrypt files. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how arrogant she had been. She thought everyone around her was too distracted or too trusting to notice. But arrogance has a way of blinding people. She never looked over her shoulder, never imagined anyone might be taking notes. And all the while I kept my distance from her. When she called, I answered politely. When she dropped by, I offered coffee, even a smile. I let her believe she still held control. But inside I was cataloging everything. Her words, her gestures, the inconsistencies she thought were invisible. Sometimes late at night, lying awake in bed, doubt crept in. Was I really strong enough to carry this through? Would people believe me when the time came? But then I would hear her voice again in my memory, that mocking laugh, that condescending tone, and the doubt hardened back into resolve. One evening, while cleaning out an old drawer, I found a box of cassette tapes from years ago. At first, I nearly tossed them, but then I remembered. She had used my landline often back then, borrowing it when hers was broken. I plugged in the old recorder, the static buzzing in my ears, and pressed play. The sound of her voice filled the room, younger, sharper, but unmistakably hers. And then, clear as day, a conversation about making papers look official. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Proof. Not just suspicion, but words preserved in time. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from the rush of possibility. My trail was no longer just notes and whispers. It was solidifying into something undeniable. The next morning, as I poured my coffee, I looked out the kitchen window and saw her walking past on the street, waving cheerfully to a neighbor. She looked so ordinary, so charming. No one would suspect a thing. But I did. And every time she smiled, I saw the cracks forming beneath. The trail was mine now. A path she didn't even realize I was walking, step by step, closer to the truth she thought she had buried. And the best part? He never saw me following. That thought echoed in my mind as I rinsed my coffee cup the next morning, the warm water slipping through my fingers. The trail I'd uncovered was no longer just about catching her lies. It had become a steady hum beneath my daily life, a rhythm only I could hear. Silence was my weapon now, sharper than any outburst could ever be. I didn't confront her, not anymore. Instead, I allowed her to keep performing. Cheerful waves to neighbors, her casual drop-ins, the way she leaned into conversations like she owned them. Every smile she flashed only confirmed my choice. Let her believe I was passive, while I built something stronger in the shadows. One afternoon, I sat in the library again, the faint scent of old paper mixing with the hum of the overhead lights. My notebook lay open, pages filled with cramped handwriting. A man at the next table coughed, shuffling newspapers, but I stayed locked on the screen. This time I wasn't just searching for evidence. I was studying rules, policies, the quiet machinery of institutions. I wanted to know exactly where her arrogance would collide with consequences. It was dry reading, tedious even, regulations about forged signatures, penalties for falsified medical records. But as my eyes scanned the words, a strange calm settled over me. These weren't just laws. They were tools waiting for someone patient enough to use them. Later that evening, my neighbor, Mrs. Harris, knocked on my door with a plate of cookies. She was kind, older than me, always eager to chat. As we spoke, I noticed how she lowered her voice when she mentioned seeing my betrayer earlier that day. She seemed off, Mrs. Harris said, frowning. Kept glancing over her shoulder. I thanked her for the cookies, but the comment stayed with me long after she left. Was she starting to sense the shift too? Maybe she didn't know why, but cracks were showing. Silence has a way of unnerving people who expect resistance. At night, when the house creaked in the dark, doubt tried to creep back in. Could I really hold this all together? What if she discovered what I was doing before I was ready? But then I'd glance at the file box tucked safely under my bed, thick with proof, and my breathing would slow. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. One small incident gave me a deeper push. I was at the grocery store comparing prices on produce, when I overheard her voice in the next aisle. She was talking to a friend, boasting about how easy it was to make people believe anything. My hands froze on a bag of apples. I forced myself to stay quiet, just another shopper. But inside, her words lit a fire. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she'd broken me so thoroughly I'd never rise again. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my recorder, playing back the old tapes I'd found. Her younger voice carried the same arrogance as her current one. "It's all about confidence," she had once said. "People only question what you let them see." I pressed pause and stared at the small device. She had given me her philosophy in her own words. All I had to do was turn it back on her. I began to rehearse silence like it was a performance. When she visited, I offered coffee, asked about her day, listened politely. I never hinted at what I knew. But in the quiet moments, I noticed how she fidgeted when the room grew too still, how her eyes darted when I didn't respond with anger. Silence unsettled her more than shouting ever could. One Sunday I attended church alone, sitting near the back pew. As the hymns echoed, I felt a calm resolve wash over me. Forgiveness was preached, but I wasn't seeking forgiveness for her. I was reclaiming strength for myself. I prayed not for her downfall but for my own endurance, for clarity to keep walking this path without stumbling. After the service, an old friend stopped me. She asked gently if I was doing all right, her eyes full of concern. I smiled and told her I was fine. And in a strange way, it wasn't a lie. I was fine, stronger than she realized, stronger than even I had expected. Back home, I sorted through the file again. Each document, each recording, each note had its place. I could almost feel the weight of it shifting the air around me. It wasn't just evidence. It was strategy, carefully stacked and ready. Yet I never rushed. That was the key. I let weeks pass, living my daily routines as though nothing had changed. I watered my plants, read my novels, cooked my dinners. She thought I was idle, wasting away. But every moment of stillness was intentional. Patience was my sharpest blade. One evening she stopped by unannounced, a false smile plastered across her face. "Just checking in," she said, glancing around my kitchen like she owned the space. I poured her tea, steady hands, calm voice. We talked about weather, neighbors, small things. But as she laughed at her own stories, I noticed her eyes flicker toward my desk, where my notebook sat closed. She couldn't read it, but her curiosity betrayed her unease. That was when I realized. Silence wasn't just strategy, it was pressure. The quieter I became, the louder her fear grew. As she left that night, she lingered at the doorway, searching my face for something, anger, despair, anything she could feed on. I gave her nothing but a polite smile. When the door clicked shut, I exhaled deeply, my chest tight with restrained emotion. She had no idea her undoing was already in motion. In those moments, I felt my age not as weakness but as strength. I had lived long enough to know storms pass, lies unravel, and patience always wins against arrogance. My silence wasn't surrender. It was the foundation of the storm she would never see coming. And then came the night. The one she had spent weeks preparing for, parading her invitations, her speeches, her dress fittings as though the whole world existed to celebrate her. I watched it unfold from the edges, each detail adding fuel to the fire I had kept banked low inside me. She thought it would be her perfect night. She had no idea it would become the stage where her mask cracked wide open. The evening air was cool, almost sharp against my skin when I arrived at the hall. The parking lot buzzed with laughter and heels clicking on the pavement. Warm light spilled from the tall windows, flickering across polished glass doors. I carried nothing that would draw suspicion, just a plain black purse tucked close to me, heavier than it looked. Inside were the tools I had chosen carefully. Not weapons of anger but instruments of truth. Stepping inside, I felt the hum of voices, the smell of perfume and wine, the faint notes of music spilling from a string quartet at the far end of the room. Everywhere I turned, people smiled, glasses raised, compliments whispered. She floated through the crowd in a shimmering dress, the picture of charm. And there it was again, that smile. The same one she had given me when she thought she had destroyed my life. But tonight I wasn't broken. I was composed, deliberate. My silence had built to this moment, and as I moved through the guests, I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing against my ribs. At one point she spotted me. Her eyes flickered just for a second, before she smoothed her face into practiced warmth. "You came," she said when she finally reached me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Of course," I answered softly, my lips curving into a polite smile. "Wouldn't miss it." We stood there face to face, the crowd swirling around us. She laughed lightly, leaning closer, her perfume strong and cloying. "I hope you're not still upset." Life has a way of sorting itself out, don't you think? I held her gaze steadily. Yes, I said, it does. Her smile wavered just enough for me to notice. She was searching for cracks in me, the old weakness she used to feed on. But all she found was composure. And that unsettled her more than anger ever could. The speeches began, people clapping, toasting, praising her as though she were untouchable. I clapped too, hands steady, expression calm. But inside I timed my breaths, steadying my heart for what was to come. My plan wasn't chaos. It was precision. Halfway through the evening, I slipped quietly toward the back, near the projection screen that had been set up for a slideshow of her accomplishments. The technician, a young man with tired eyes, was adjusting cables. I leaned close, speaking gently as though I were just another helpful guest. Would you mind if I add a short message? A tribute from family, I said, holding up the small flash drive I had brought. My voice was calm, practiced, grandmotherly even. He hesitated, then nodded, barely questioning. People rarely doubt a woman my age when she speaks kindly. As he loaded the file, I felt my pulse quicken. My palms dampened, though my face betrayed nothing. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times, yet the reality was heavier, sharper. Back at my table I waited. My fingers curled around the stem of my glass, cool against my skin. The music swelled, the laughter rose, and she basked in the glow of it all. But as the lights dimmed for her slideshow, a hush fell across the room. This was her moment, her crown of praise. The first images appeared, childhood photos, smiles, staged memories. People laughed softly, clapping at the milestones. Then, seamlessly, my additions began. A document flashed onto the screen, crisp, undeniable. My name. Her handwriting. A date that exposed the lie. Whispers stirred immediately, low and confused. Another slide. A receipt, her signature overlapping with mine. Another. A recording, her voice faint but audible. It's easy. People don't question what looks official. Gasps cut through the room. Faces turned toward her, eyes narrowing, lips parting in disbelief. The music had stopped. The laughter evaporated, leaving only the harsh hum of the projector as each piece of truth unfolded. I didn't move. I sat still, watching the ripples spread through the crowd. Chairs shifted, glasses clinked nervously. Some guests whispered to each other, others stared directly at her. She stood frozen near the stage, her smile gone, her face pale under the soft light. This isn't real, she stammered, her voice trembling. But her words lacked the confidence she had always wielded like a sword. Someone in the crowd muttered, but it's her voice. Another, that's her writing. The murmurs grew louder, sharper, surrounding her like a storm. Her eyes found me across the room. For the first time I saw fear in them. Real fear. The kind that strips away arrogance. I didn't gloat. I didn't rise. I simply held her gaze, calm and steady, the way I had promised myself I would. My silence had built to this crescendo, and now the truth spoke louder than I ever could. She tried to laugh it off, to wave her hand dismissively. It's some kind of mistake, she said, her voice cracking. But no one clapped this time, no one rushed to defend her. The charm she had spun so carefully unraveled in seconds. The room grew heavy with unease. Guests shifted away from her, their admiration curdling into suspicion. Even the quartet faltered, their bows pausing midair. She looked small then, smaller than I had ever seen her. Not the triumphant woman who had once smiled as my wedding collapsed, but a figure cornered by her own lies. And as the final slide faded, the lights rose and the silence hung thick, I felt the weight in my chest lift slightly. Not victory, not yet. But the first crack in her mask had appeared, right there in front of everyone. She stumbled forward, her voice pleading now, reaching for someone, anyone, to believe her. But the crowd had already begun to shift away, their trust dissolving. I stayed in my seat, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my breathing steady. I didn't need to say a word. My silence had carried me here, and it was enough. And in her eyes, locked on mine across the room, I saw it clearly, the mask slipping, piece by piece, as the storm I had built finally touched her. The room didn't explode in chaos the way movies make you think it will. It collapsed in silence. A deep, suffocating silence where everyone avoided her gaze, where every clink of glass felt too loud. She swayed near the stage, clutching her hands together, still trying to summon that false charm, but no one reached out. Not a single friend. Not a single ally. I rose slowly, my chair scraping across the polished floor. Every step toward her echoed in my ears, steady and deliberate. I didn't rush. I wanted her to feel each second stretch, to understand what it meant when silence became power. When I finally stood before her, she whispered, desperate, "You did this." I leaned closer, close enough for her to see the calm in my eyes. "No," I said softly. "You did this to yourself." Her lips trembled, her face pale beneath the bright lights. For the first time, the woman who had laughed at my pain, who had stolen my name and dismantled my future, had nowhere to run. But the true twist, the part she never saw coming, was still waiting. As guests began murmuring, shifting uncomfortably, I turned toward the microphone left at the podium. My fingers curled around it, steady despite the adrenaline flooding my body. The sound of my voice, calm but clear, filled the hall. "For months," I began, "I have been silent. People thought it meant weakness. They thought it meant surrender. But silence," I paused, letting the word hang, "is strategy." I reached into my purse and held up a small stack of certified documents, each stamped and notarized. "Everything you've seen tonight isn't just rumor or accusation. It's been verified. Witnesses have spoken. Records have been checked. What you've watched here is not the beginning. It's the confirmation of what's already in motion." Her gasp cut through the air like glass breaking. "You know you wouldn't." But I kept going, my voice unwavering. "A formal complaint has already been filed. The institutions you used so carelessly are now the same ones investigating you. Tonight isn't about humiliation. It's about accountability." The crowd shifted again, but this time toward me. I saw recognition dawning in their eyes. The woman they had pitied was not broken after all. She had been patient. She staggered forward, her voice cracking. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly," I said, cutting her off. "You forged my name. You destroyed my wedding. You thought it would end there. But what you didn't see was the trail you left behind. And I followed every step." Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her. Around us, whispers grew sharper. "Forgery? She filed complaints? There's evidence?" She reached out as if to steady herself against the podium, but I stepped back, leaving her to grasp only air. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. And in that silence I saw her collapse inward, the mask finally gone. I set the microphone down gently, not with triumph but with finality. My work here was done. As I walked back toward the exit, I caught glimpses of faces. Neighbors, acquaintances, even old friends who had once believed her lies. Their expressions weren't pity anymore. They were respect, even admiration. Some nodded slightly as I passed, a quiet acknowledgement that I had reclaimed what was stolen. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, fresh and cleansing. I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight in my chest begin to lift. Revenge had carried me this far, but what I felt now wasn't bitterness. It was release. In the days that followed, the fallout spread quickly. Calls came not to me but about her. Employers severed ties. Organizations withdrew support. Friends who had once adored her disappeared into silence. The investigation moved forward with the efficiency I had trusted it would. And she, the woman who once smirked at my ruin, now lived in the shadow of her own undoing. I didn't need to chase her anymore. The systems she mocked were now her judges. And yet the greatest twist wasn't hers. It was mine. Because in the stillness after the storm, I discovered something I hadn't expected. I thought revenge would feel like fire, like triumph. Instead it felt like peace. I found myself returning to small joys I had abandoned. Morning walks, baking bread, tending to my garden. My neighbors stopped by more often, not out of pity but out of warmth. Even Carol, the woman who had once been her victim too, called to thank me, her voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. "You gave me closure," she said. "You gave all of us closure." And maybe that was the real victory. Not just proving her lies, not just reclaiming my dignity, but showing that silence, patience, and truth could dismantle even the most arrogant facade. One evening, weeks later, I passed her on the street. She didn't meet my eyes. She looked smaller, diminished, her shoulders hunched. For a moment I almost pitied her. But then I remembered that first smile, the one she gave when she thought she had ended me. And the pity vanished. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I simply walked on, the sound of my footsteps steady and unbroken. because walking away, whole, unshaken, stronger than before, was the most powerful revenge of all. And that, I realized as the sun dipped below the horizon, was the final gift she never intended to give me. Not just the chance to expose her lies, but the chance to rediscover my own strength. She thought she stole my future, but in the end she only handed me back my power. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Join our community of women who know the pain of betrayal and the power of revenge. More dark, emotional stories are waiting for you.